My artist of research is Karen Trask. So Karen Trask is a Canadian artist born in 1954, and she was from Fergus, Ontario, but now lives in Montreal. She has achieved a couple of degrees in art from the University of Waterloo, as well as from Concordia University in Montreal. As an artist, she uses language as a type of landscape that, from self-written works, borrowed texts, and sculpted or drawn words, she molds together these intricate little sculptures. So her work mostly involves paper and words. She creates this link between early textile arts and technologies such as spinning, weaving, and paper making, things that are woman creations and jobs that are still being done today. So Karen's expressed that keeping these activities alive is important to her because things that are woven together with paper or cloth do not last forever like rock might. So it's something that has to continue to be made to live on. The material and process of her work tends to play with the meaning of words, book structures, and narrative formats. So Karen's work is right on cue with what we're working with in our sculpture class because it has so much to do with paper. Her ability to weave pages and words together is incredible. At first glance, this piece looks more like a piece of cloth that's been woven together with some sort of a fabric material, but it is actually paper strung from the French Collins French Gem Dictionary. So there's definitely a level of patience that has come with learning to move paper in such a way. Her process involves finding the right quality of paper, which is often in books. Newspaper is too thin and cardboard is just too thick, so then she lays the paper between two wet paper towels to dampen overnight, and then she slices the paper into a series of cuts that basically go to the end of the sheet, and then attaches the paper to a drill to spin into like a rope-like form. Another work by Karen here is called Fait et refait and continue, which means done and redone continuously. This thought is carried out through several of her works. I find this title very interesting because it not only sends a message to what this work of art means, but it also seems to reflect on her repetitive actions of weaving paper. Even though her works are all relatively different in form, many of them involve the same continuous weaving and molding of the paper that transforms it into a rope-like structure. So this piece is very haunting from my perspective. It kind of reminds me of ghosts. Perhaps it's just mimicking the human form. With that being said, she's definitely touching on the way that people live, and every day is done and then redone until death, and even then, life continues on. So this untitled work is also made from pages that are again woven into strands, which were abstractly assembled into a book with a spilling sort of suggestion. I also noticed that there are map pieces in the book and on the strands, which made me realize how connected people are to words. Like even the places that we travel and the objects that we see, they're all built on words. There's nothing that's unnamed. Perhaps the only thing that goes against that is art, because like here is an untitled work of art that, as anyone who can see, we know it's made from a book and it's filled with paper and words and maps, but yet when we look at it, or at least when I look at it, I can't really say I know what it is or why it is as a subject. But I suppose that's the difference between art and science. I also enjoyed these untitled bookworks that she made with nature, and the way that she wrapped the branches in text and paper. It made me think that everything has a story and everything leaves their own kind of mark. And these are like captured bits from nature that are pieces of that story. So this little sculpture above in translation says, "Everything, nothing." Something that Karen mentioned to me was the theme of contrast in her work. Oftentimes she would see things as both in the process of falling apart and being put back together. And this is just a little quote from her. She says, My creative process has developed as a series of poetic investigations, exploring ideas and experiences through language. It is the ephemeral and ever-changing nature of words that I find fascinating, creating links to early textile arts, technologies, spinning, weaving, paper making, playing with word meanings, book structures, and narrative formats are all a part of my approach to making art. Repetitive, circular rhythms, touch, and transformation are strategies and processes I use to examine themes of absence, memory, and time. I want to touch words. I want to touch the space between words. My final works are often hybrid forms of installation, sculpture, video, performance, and artist books. So these are two similar paper works by Karen. Just to the left is a detailed shot of Waves 1, and the other one is Listening Knots from 2014. Both of them are intricately sculpted in a way that makes the paper look like the thread of a net. And here again, words are woven together, twisted, tied, and carried on through this work of art in order to promote the thought of language and how words work. So as we saw Karen use maps from a book before, now she is using letters and marks to make a map. I think this is an interesting take on her pursuits of language in sculpture because language is all around us and it is made up of sounds and letters that merge together to form words and further stories, which make up the culture and world around us. So nothing is made into everything and everything is boiled down to basically nothing, and that's a key thought in her work. So this is a piece from Karen's Où vont les mots, or Where the Words Go exhibition, made from hundreds of dictionaries. But this is just one of the works here. It's a compacted sphere, and it's actually part of a performance artwork which shows the process of her unwrapping the ball and rewrapping it. So she did this performance in Sackville, New Brunswick, and she started out with the ball already intact and then began to roll it out from a building and around town and along sidewalks and by the river and just all over town. And she actually rolled it by the newspaper office, and the guy that worked there had come out and saw the strung paper, and he followed it to see where it was coming from, and so that's how she got in the newspaper. So it was so interesting for just like the whole town to become a part of this. As she was unraveling this ball, she was leaving this thread behind for other people to come across, and other people met her on the street as she was unraveling it or raveling it, just curious about what she was doing. It's kind of like seeing a human version of a kitten rolling a ball of yarn around. Of course, kids that came across her were just overjoyed to see a fun new sort of event happening and jumped in to help out. This work made me think about the way that words literally travel and people notice what we say like a piece of paper on the ground, especially children. Like, kids are always listening and they're the most aware of what is being said. But her main idea in creating this work was to make a connection to the whole town. So there was like the townies and the gownies, and she wanted to create a link together. So the next work of art I wanted to look at is a piece called Slipping Through My Fingers from 1989. I think this is one of my favorite works because it's so emotionally raw. It is made of a crimped metal back, paper hands, and some type of plastered feet. Very beautifully crafted. There's both a presence and an absence about this work, by the way that she's incorporated part of a figure and then like this blank sort of empty body. And as soon as I read the title of this work, I had the ABBA song Slipping Through My Fingers pop into my head, and so I had to go and listen to it on YouTube, and I thought maybe this was a special song for Karen. And I had read a blurb before going there about Karen talking about her mom and as a part of her inspirations to her work, and she just had mentioned this quote here: "When I was 6 years old, my mother died in a car accident. Learning to read and write coincided with death. This marked the beginning of a dialogue with absence that I've been exploring, breathing, falling into, and ultimately searching for words to describe. Paper, normally the invisible and ignored support material, is one of the materials I use to create this presence of absence. So this work really struck me, and I had thought maybe the song was an influence of hers, but it just happens to be discussing the same type of loss as one is slipping through their fingers. It's so beautiful, and I found the sculpture just really complemented the song. Although from my new interactions with Karen, she actually said that she created this piece with her father in mind, who was dying of cancer at the time. Finally, one last work of art I wanted to show you is not actually paper-based or language-based, and it's actually quite recent, from 2020, and she's still working on this at the time. It's a performance piece called Burial Practices, and I thought this work is so simple, but yet it speaks great depths. And so there's these little caverns and like crevices in the earth that she found. I think spaces near her studio or apartment. And so when she saw them, she was just inspired to put herself in these little places. The photo is also stunning, taken by her boyfriend and photographer Paul Litherland. I thought this is just another good example of how people can be a part of sculptures too. So thank you so much for watching. Feel free to stay and wander back at these works, and also feel free to message me on Facebook if you have any questions, and I'll do my best to answer. I'd also encourage you to check out Karen Trask's Do, Undo, Redo performance on YouTube. It's a fun little journey. Thanks again.